G'day, mate. 40 here. So I don't have a strong position on tariffs. My background, my training, went to UCLA. I studied economics at UCLA. UCLA comes from the Milton Friedman Chicago School libertarian approach to economics, which is very much for as few trade barriers and as low tariffs as possible. And then Donald Trump came along and he opened my mind that maybe there's a case for tariffs, but I don't have a strong opinion either way with tariffs, no tariffs, medium tariffs. I don't have a strong opinion. What I do have a strong opinion on is absolute contempt for those who just are 100% convinced of their righteousness, that they see clearly that free trade is the only way to go, that using tariffs is just low IQ and stupid. All right. For people like my friend Nathan Cofnas and for the media elite and for everyone who is proclaiming about the tariff issues, that it's just absolutely clear that what Trump is doing is stupid and wrong and idiotic and destructive and perilous and just obviously a horrible idea. I have contempt for that perspective, that you are so certain that you know it all. All right, brilliant people disagree on this topic. All right, every nation that's become rich, how have they become rich? Has it been through free trade? No, it has not been through free trade. Every nation has become rich through varying degrees of protectionism. Every nation has become rich through following processes and policies very similar to what Trump is trying to do. But you know better, right? Even though there's no empirical example to support you, even though every single nation has become rich through pursuing protectionism, you know better than every empirical example in history. You know better than in all of history. You know better than the people who have led every nation to prosperity. And you are 100% convinced of your righteousness, of your clarity, that you know it all. All right, that I have contempt for. That you are just completely assured that even though every single example we have of a country becoming rich has pursued protectionist policies, right? But you know better that that is dumb and stupid, even though that's the only path that we know in human history on this planet, in this world, to become rich is by pursuing varying degrees of protectionist policies. But you are completely assured, you know better. It's just so damn obvious that tariffs are stupid, that Trump is stupid, that what Trump has been doing is idiotic. You have that complete clarity. All right, that I have contempt for. All right. So when every single example you have in history of a nation becoming rich is it pursues protectionist policies. What about when nations are fighting for their survival? You would think then a nation fighting for their survival, right? It is absolutely essential that they follow the most economically efficient path possible, right? If you're a nation fighting for your survival, right? Don't you want to follow the most efficient path possible? Okay, so what do we see when nations are fighting for their very existence? What do we see when nations are at war? Economically efficient path, right? Are they going out there and following free trade? No, they're not. When nations are fighting for their survival, they're not following free trade principles, right? Why? If a nation's fighting for its survival when it's absolutely essential that it harness its economy to help the nation survive, why are they not following free trade, right? Why are they following varying degrees of top-down industrial policy and various forms of protectionism? So, number one, all examples we have of nations becoming rich have followed protectionist policies. Number two, nations fighting for their survival follow protectionist policies. But yet, you are 100% convinced of your righteousness, your clarity, your knowledge, your wisdom, that Donald Trump is a complete idiot and you know better and that free trade is the way to go and tariffs are stupid. Well, why is it, if tariffs are stupid, that when nations are fighting for their survival, they use protectionist measures? Why is it that when nations are struggling and trying to get rich and achieving wealth and prosperity and dominance, they always have done it through a path of protectionism, not through free trade, right? If free trade is such a panacea, if free trade is so wonderful, how come we don't have examples of nations becoming rich through free trade? How come we don't have examples of when nations are fighting for their survival and they need 100% from their economy? They need the best from their economy. How come we don't have those examples All right, nations fighting in a world war. Why wasn't World War II Germany? Why wasn't World War I Germany or England or Japan? Why weren't they following free trade policies if it's just so damn obvious that free trade is the way to go? And if you're not following free trade, then you're just a low IQ moron, right? How come we don't have any examples like that? All right, Nathan Cofnas says, if I'd known that MAGA would become a poverty cult, right? MAGA already had one term in office, and it was not a poverty cult, right? To call MAGA a poverty cult is a cheap put down. It is a moronic thing to say, Nathan Cofnas. If I'd known that, he writes, MAGA would become a poverty cult obsessed with bringing Chinese sweatshops to the U.S., right? That is Donald Trump's trade policy. All right, we already know what Donald Trump is like. We had 4 years of Donald Trump. And I would say that Trump 1 and Trump 2 are not obsessed with bringing Chinese sweatshops to the U.S., but Nathan Cofnas thinks that because Donald Trump has been using tariffs, that therefore, if he'd known that Trump would use tariffs this way, he would have supported DEI Kamala. Nathan says, no one anticipated that Trump would declare war on every other country in the earth. Is that accurate? Has Trump declared war on every other country on earth? No. Fact check, inaccurate. That Trump would tank the economy for no reason. Is that true? Did Trump tank the economy? No. Right. So there are lessons, Nathan says. Okay, after making a bunch of really bad points, he says the problem isn't Trump. Oh, okay. It's that the American so-called right, well, right and left are not subjective, right? What is the so-called right? It means it stands for traditional ways of organizing families rather than trying all sorts of new ways of defining a family or raising a family. Being on the right means that you support harsher punishment of norm violators, right? Say people who murder and rape and torture. You are for harsher punishment. So there's no reason to put parentheses around the right, right? That's a moronic thing to do. The American so-called right, right? That's a moronic point. There is a right in America. There's a right in England. There's a right in France. There's been a right down through history, meaning you favor harsher punishment for norm violators. You are less inclined towards equal redistribution of resources. You have more skepticism of outgroups, if not hostility, if not outright fear, right? That's what it means to be on the right. So by these definitions, you've effectively had the right and left down through history for thousands of years. Right. So according to Cofnas, the American so-called right has become a coalition of stupid people from across the political spectrum. So Scott Bessent, the American Treasury Secretary, stupid person. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, stupid person. Donald Trump, stupid person. Donald Trump is not stupid. Right. The right-wing intellectuals at Claremont are associated with Claremont supporting Donald Trump. The right-wing intellectuals at Chronicles magazine supporting Donald Trump and before Donald Trump, Pat Buchanan, are not stupid. Right? The paleocons have been right about every important issue for more than 60 years. And this protectionist trade policy has long been a foundation of paleocon thinking. So the paleocons have been right about everything for 60 years, but you're just so clear now that they're a bunch of morons. Right? The paleocons are very much on board with Donald Trump. At the lowest levels, the left and right converge on fascism. That is just completely moronic. He has no idea what fascism is. Fascism was a time-sensitive movement in the 1930s, possibly into the early 1940s, in reaction to totalitarian communism. We have zero examples of fascist states after 1946. We have zero examples of fascist states prior to 1920. There's no fascism in power in the world today. To say that there is fascism in power in the world today shows that you're the low IQ moron who doesn't know what fascism is. You have no understanding of fascism. You have no understanding about what you're talking about, but you speak with complete assurance, even though you don't have an empirical, rational basis for doing so. Right, given that every single country has become rich through employing protectionism, given that every single nation, when it's fighting for its survival, uses varying degrees of protectionism, but suddenly you know better because in your theoretical world it's just so obvious to you that free trade is right and that Donald Trump and MAGA are wrong. Right, at the lowest levels, the left and right convergent that makes no sense. All right, the left is not fascist. Right. If you're silly like Jonah Goldberg and talk about liberal fascism, but there's nothing in the left. Give me an example of a left-wing regime that is fascist. Right? Fascist means that you prefer traditional ways of organizing community. It means that you have great fear, concern, if not antipathy towards outsiders. That being on the right means that you don't have a strong commitment to equal distribution of resources. Being on the right means that you recognize that hierarchy is normal, natural, and healthy, that racial identity is normal, natural, and healthy, that ethnic identity is normal, natural, and healthy, that national identity is normal, natural, and healthy. These are not left-wing perspectives. So the idea that the left and the right in their low IQ version converges on fascism makes absolutely no philosophical, logical, empirical, historical, or political sense. It's just a complete moronic perspective. They favor a controlled economy over the invisible hand. Well, guess what? There has never been an economy in the world that has been run by an invisible hand. So, in your mental construct, all right, you have an imagination about all sorts of economies that have been run by an invisible hand. It has never occurred. We have 0 examples in history of economies being run by an invisible hand. But you think, oh, this is just obvious, low IQ, moronic, left-wing. It's liberal fascism, guys. Right? It's Cofnas is just completely out to lunch here. Just makes absolutely no sense. Every single example we have of an economy is a controlled economy. We have 0 empirical examples of an invisible hand economy. The wisdom of the vogue over universities and book learning. Okay, so sometimes the vogue, the people, do have superior wisdom to what you learn in universities and from the primary producers of books, right? In matters of morality, you will usually be better served following what your grandmother wishes you to do rather than what universities and books tell you to do. So I'm not someone who believes that inherently the vogue is superior to books and universities, or that universities and books are just inherently superior to regular people. All right, they each have different strengths and weaknesses. Oh, thuggery over due process. All right, Cofnas doesn't understand that the right cannot imitate the left in taking over institutions through a long march, because right now, pretty much all major institutions in advanced economies are controlled by varying forms of the left, and the left is really good at detecting conservatives and preventing them from rising. The only way for the right to gain mastery over institutions right now is from the top down. Now, in Nathan Cofnas' fantasy world, in his imaginary world, all right, where he thinks there are all these economies run by an invisible hand, where there's left-wing fascism, right? This nonsensical dream world that apparently he inhabits has been triggered into due to Trump's tariff policy. Maybe then things are somewhat different. But in the real world, the only way for the right to gain mastery over institutions right now is from the top down, right? Elon Musk took over Twitter and he changed it from the top down, right? That's the only way to change the legal profession, the medical profession, universities, media, big business, small business. The only way right now for the right to start to make some progress with regard to institutions is from the top down, and sometimes that requires not being very nice. But Cofnas calls this thuggery over due process. So as opposed to when the left just ran things, then it was just all sweetness and light. Trump wouldn't be able to get away with this if he didn't have an army of cat turds with the same dumb intuitions cheering him on. There has never been a more influential American president in the last 80 years. And so if you think that Trump has been this influential because he's so dumb and his supporters are so dumb, I think you are the dumb one in this regard. Right? Trump is able to get away with this, not because he's got cat turd and idiots on his side. Trump is being effective because he's got very smart people on his side. Trump's future torchbearer will have to be an idiot to keep the MAGA coalition together, so he'll be no better. Well, we had 4 years of Donald Trump. It was superior to the 8 years of Barack Obama, the 8 years of George W. Bush. It was superior to the 4 years of Joe Biden. All right, we know what Trump is like as president, and he's been pretty damn good compared to the alternatives on planet Earth. Now, maybe in your fevered imagination, there is some wise philosopher king who, in your imagination, is just so awesome. But in the real world, Donald Trump is far better than the alternatives. All over the world, almost everyone with more than half a brain. Okay, this is from someone who's just made a series of moronic statements, and now he's calling those who disagree with him just having half a brain. Is looking at the disaster of Trump. The disaster of Trump, the most influential president in 80 years, all right? Along with Putin, the disaster of Putin. Putin took Russia, which was on its knees, and he restored it to superpower status. Yoon Suk Yeol, I don't know who that is. And people are drawing is he the former leader of South Korea who was deposed? I think, yeah, okay, former president of South Korea. Okay, people are looking and drawing the reasonable conclusion that right-wing anti-woke parties are incapable of effective governance. Putin has been an incredibly effective leader of Russia. Right? This is just such a moronic statement. Right? As opposed to that drunk who was leading Russia before Putin, Putin has done more with the cause that he has than any leader of a major power in 80 years. Right? Oh, right-wing anti-woke parties are incapable of effective governance. Donald Trump strikes me as governing quite effectively. This is my conclusion. The right in its current form attracts such low human capital. Really, the Chronicles magazine crowd, the Claremont crowd, right? The crowd around Donald Trump, that's just low human capital. Right? Big tech sided with Donald Trump. So you are arguing that Elon Musk and David Sachs and the co-founder of Airbnb went to work for Elon Musk with Doge. You're telling me these are low human capital, right? You're telling me that the leaders of big tech are low human capital, right? You're the moron if you think that. The right attracts such low human capital. What a ridiculous thing to say that is counterproductive for it to actually take power. I've been arguing that the right needs to focus on winning the battle of ideas, bringing the elites to our side. I'm all for winning the battle of ideas. I'm all for bringing the elites to our side. I'm not for saying that this should be our overwhelming focus. You know what might be more important? Let's say ending affirmative action, ending diversity, equity, and inclusion, ending the left's stranglehold on institutions, right? Removing the impediments to the quality of life for tens of millions of Americans, right? To me, that's as important as winning the battle of ideas. I mean, foolish me, improving the quality of life for 100, 200 million Americans, just in my own naive, quaint perspective, that strikes me as just as important as winning the battle of ideas, right? Crushing affirmative action, crushing DEI, just those two things, all right? And crushing them in the cultural discussion sphere, right? Just those two things dramatically improve the quality of life. American quality of life was dramatically different the day after the November 2024 election, right? We weren't at each other's throats. You didn't have workplaces getting torn apart. All right, the quality of life in this country is dramatically improved since Trump's election. Right? You don't have rampaging Black Lives Matter. You don't have rampaging Antifa. Right? You don't have rampaging racial identity groups destroying the quality of life in this country. Cofnas says, I lost the battle to set the agenda for the right. Yeah, and it seems a tad arrogant. All right, did anyone expect? Did Nathan Cofnas, was he ever in there with a chance to set the agenda for the right? I mean, I applaud almost everything he does until he lost his mind over the Tariffs issue. But apparently, the battle to set the agenda for the right, it was decided that the only thing that matters is taking power and trolling leftists. Really? This has been the most effective president in 80 years, so that's obviously false. What matters to Donald Trump is not just taking power and trolling leftists, right? He, consequential for good or for ill, this is the most consequential president 2.5 months in that we've had in 80 years. Trump won the election, issued some executive orders, and anti-Wokists declared victory. This is such a moronically shallow, I guess, willfully shallow perspective. The important thing with Trump's executive orders was not the executive order itself, right? It was the cultural discussion that kicked off. We are seeing the fruits of this strategy, a right that is on track to be totally discredited and cede power back to the woke. I don't see that at all. Oh, it's still possible to turn this around. How? Republican-controlled Congress should invoke the 25th Amendment. Yes, they should get rid of the most effective Republican president since Abraham Lincoln. Yes, that would be great. Carry Trump away in a straitjacket, revoke the tariffs, and devote their political capital to important issues like deporting illegal aliens. Oh, so Donald Trump is not trying to deport illegal aliens? Donald Trump did what we were told was impossible. He crushed illegal immigration. He crushed it already. This is the kind of action that would be taken by smart people, not Republicans. So a smart person would invoke the 25th Amendment against Donald Trump and carry him away in a straitjacket. And that strikes you as smart? If you want the right to prevail in the long run, you should do everything you can to prevent right-wing political parties from gaining power prematurely. Right? This is silly. Right? When the right takes power, they are usually less receptive to immigration than the left. And they're usually more on the side of law and order than the left. All focus should be on the hereditarian revolution, which we fight for in the realm of ideas, not yet in the ballot box. Call me a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I would say improving the quality of life for hundreds of millions of Americans is as worthy as fighting for the hereditarian revolution. To me, improving the quality of life for hundreds of millions of people is as worthy as fighting in the realm of ideas. I mean, that's just silly, naive me. I think improve the life of tens, hundreds of millions of Americans, and to me, that's as important as fighting in the realm of ideas. And the media coverage and the Nathan Cofnas coverage of Trump's tariff policy is just so one-sided. And I'm not someone here arguing, oh, we need tariffs, Trump is doing the right thing, Trump should be beyond criticism. Trump, like me, like everyone, like Nathan Cofnas, everybody benefits from accurate criticism. But that Trump has done things in a flawed way, right, doesn't mean that they're automatically wrong. That Trump has made mistakes doesn't mean that he's automatically wrong. You have to judge by the totality. And what bugs me is those with absolute assurance against all empirical reality declare that the only decent thing to see is that free trade is the way to go, right? Your arrogance, your war on reality, your war on history, your war on every example we have of a nation becoming rich, and your war on the empirical reality that every time a nation state is fighting for its survival, it adopts various forms of protectionist policies, right? Your contempt for reality, your contempt for facts, your contempt for every single example we have with regard to a nation becoming rich or fighting for survival and always employing protectionist policies, your contempt for every single empirical example which goes against your theories, but you are 100% assured that you are right, even though you have zero empirical basis in history on your side, right? Your contempt then for those of us who have an open mind for protectionist policies. I have contempt for you, right? I have contempt for the one-sided nature of the coverage of Trump's tariffs, right? I have contempt for the elite perspective that says the only possible thing to see with regard to trade is that obviously free trade is the way to go. And when you talk to economists, when you talk to elites, right, for them, the welfare of peasants in China or people in Malaysia, it's every bit as important to them than the welfare of their fellow Americans, right? These elites have absolutely no loyalty to their own people, right? They have a loyalty to a fantasy of free trade and an invisible hand guiding an economy, even though we have zero empirical examples in reality, in this world, in history, right? Zero empirical examples. So when you have no empirical examples of what you proclaim is the only way to go, right, then you live in a world of complete fantasy, completely disconnected from reality. And then you get on your high horse and you start lecturing us. You start talking down to us. You start calling us morons, right? Tens of millions of Americans like Trump's tariff policy, right? It's by no means clear and settled that free trade is the only approach to trade, right? So I have contempt for the one-sided nature of the discussion of this issue. Contempt for the mainstream media and for academic elites and other elites who have contempt for anyone who has any other perspective aside from, yay, free trade. Right? I'm not pro-anti-free trade protectionism. Right? I'm in the middle. I'm not going to proclaim that I just know better than everyone else. I do know a little bit of history.
Grateful to have you here. I'd love to start, Salena, with you, and just because I haven't talked to you about it, what's your 30,000-foot view of how the tariffs are going as a policy and as something the country's discussing?
In terms of, geography is everything when it comes to this issue, I think. And so I'm in a part of the country. I live in a part of the country, Western Pennsylvania, but I also cover the Appalachia and the Great Lakes Midwest. And in these areas, and even out in the West, I was talking to a bunch of cattle ranchers out in Kansas. The issue of the tariffs is something they're really happy about. And even, I was talking to Anthony, who's a chemist working in the energy industry. And he said, look, I know my 401k is going to take a hit. However, I know in the long run, this is better for the country. If we start to bring back manufacturing, if we give people a level playing field, this is what I voted for. And this is a guy that's outside of the working, like sort of the blue collar image that you might have of someone working in manufacturing. This is a college educated guy who's traveled all over the world in the energy industry. So I think a lot of the different perspectives are geographical. So where I cover, people are happy. This is what they wanted to see. They are also willing to see some instability with their 401ks. They believe in the long run, things will return to a normal.
Beverly, are you experiencing it in your environs the same way?
Yeah, so I'm based in South Carolina, and I hear very much the same thing. I think part of this is because the president is someone who people trust. So I think this is one of the reasons why he was reelected. The indictments only helped him because people saw him as somebody who's trying to fight the elite that wanted to take him down. So I think for the time being, people are going to trust what he's doing. Now, I think the key is how long does it take? So the president does keep using this phrase short-term pain. And I think people are willing to do that. But how long is short term? So I really think that that's where the crux of this is. I also think an interesting side to this as well is tariffs isn't something that people know a lot about. It's very intricate in some ways. And I think this tariff discussion really breaks down into three different areas. One is this purely about being reciprocal, making sure that it's fair and free trade, level the playing field, get rid of tariffs? That's what I keep hearing from people. If it's reciprocal, they're fine with it. But then you get into whether or not this is about raising revenue. Is this about protectionism? And President Trump has not been completely clear on that. I think that's why the markets have been volatile, because what is the end goal?
Oh my God. He didn't say everything that he intended. Oh my God, that's awful. He didn't set forward a coherent, rational plan, and he wasn't super clear that, this is the goal. God forbid that he leaves some ambiguity, right? God forbid that he doesn't mean everything he says and says everything means. Well, look, get real. In the real world, people rarely say what they mean. People rarely mean what they say. And the more power you have, and the president of the United States is the most powerful man on earth. So the more power you have, and President Trump has more power than anybody, the more incentives you have to withhold full disclosure, right? He is trying to navigate a challenge, and almost every incentive he has, right, would militate against being explicitly clear on his goals and his means and his ways and his purposes.
And I don't think that's clear right now.
So there's some public opinion polling out that suggests the tariffs are not particularly popular. I don't love the wording of these questions, and I think a lot of people couldn't help but be influenced by the news coverage. Why is the news coverage hostile to the president's policies? I think it's fair to say that the establishment media is more hostile to the policy than the country at large. I think that's fair to say. Why? Number one, the establishment media doesn't like Donald Trump. So it's a Trump thing. They're against it. Number two, the establishment media talks to and hangs out with Wall Street types, the very wealthy people who have flourished under a world with international trade, and less likely to hang out with people who live in Selena's neighborhood who have not flourished in the last 30 years. Three, they grew up as free traders. A lot of them went to Ivy League schools or other schools, and they just have learned trade barriers are bad, tariffs are bad, free trade is good. And then they like controversy, and this is controversial, so they like that. And they tend to be globalists and have a globalist attitude. So they're I won't say they're as concerned as what happens in Germany as they are in the United States, but they think more globally than about America first. All of that means that we're all trying to understand not just what's happening and the impact on the country, but how people are feeling about it from a point of view. If you're reliant at all on the establishment media, it's not a complete accurate portrayal. And here we have someone in Western Pennsylvania and someone in South Carolina.
Exactly. All right. The media is giving you an incredibly one-sided perspective on these tariffs. And so this idea that the left and right on a low IQ basis, right, they meet in a common fascism, there's no difference between the left and the right then on this low IQ expression. Look, the left is characterized by a commitment to equal share of resources, right, to minimal punishment for norm violators, openness, and often welcoming of outsiders, internationalism, right, the opposite of nationalism, right? The right wing is characterized by an emphasis on authority, hierarchy, order, duty, tradition, nationalism, racial identity, ethnic identity, religious identity, right? So the idea that left and right just combine on a low IQ version with fascism is ridiculous, right? Fascism is not about equal sharing of resources. It's not about internationalism. It's not about new and innovative ways of having a family, right? So you got two blokes marrying each other. That's not fascism, right? That depends on the left.
Carolina, who are here to tell you that where they are, there's much less upset, much more, I would say, maturity than the billionaires are showing about what's going on, and a confidence that, at a minimum, the president deserves a chance to do this. Salena, you wrote this great story. One of the smartest things the Washington Post has done in the last 20 years is to hire Salena to write for the Washington Post, a voice of a type that doesn't normally appear in the paper. If you don't have a Washington Post subscription, it's worth it just for this. How often are you writing for the Post? Like every week? Every other week?
No. Once a month.
Once a month, okay.
Yeah, these are really deep dive stories. Yeah.
So the piece you wrote that published yesterday, or maybe late the day before, is about you're visiting a steel mill. Tell people what you saw, what you learned.
Okay, where's the latest version of Halperin show? This is his show from 3 hours ago.
Both of them here with us tonight. Steve, start with you. Just your reaction to what the president did. Is it good policy, good politics, and what happens next?
Well, it's certainly not good policy. Whether it's good politics or not, I think the jury is.
Oh, he's certain it's not good policy, right? He has no empirical basis to say that, but he's absolutely certain, right? This guy just has Trump derangement syndrome. No matter what Trump does, right, he loathes it. And why is it not good policy? Because it doesn't follow a certain process, right? He doesn't consult adequately with Congress. I don't know about you or me, but when it comes to measures that improve the quality of lives of tens of millions of Americans, that doesn't matter to me if it doesn't follow the proper process. Like, God forbid that we don't have adequate consultation with Congress. Sure, we could improve the lives of 200 million Americans, but let's not improve the lives of 200 million Americans, right? What's more important than improving the lives of 200 million Americans is that we follow the process, certain process that this guy likes, that there is a proper consultation with Congress, right? This is nonsense. If the president could do something that he has the power to do and can improve the lives of ordinary Americans, then by all means do it. And if the president does things that diminish the quality of life for tens of millions of Americans, then that sucks. And it doesn't really matter that much what process is followed or whether Congress was adequately consulted, right? As long as the president is operating within the law. But this guy's all mad because Trump's not following the process.
Is out. I think, and I'm not, as you said, I worked for one of Congress's leading protectionists. I'm not a...
Yeah, he worked for Gephardt. So this guy supports tariffs, but because Donald Trump is imposing the tariffs, he's lost his mind, and he thinks that Trump's tariffs, right? Gephardt's tariffs, those were really smart and morally good, but Trump's tariffs are bad because they don't follow his process and they don't include adequate consultation with Congress.
A hardcore free trader. I think the problem with what he's done over the last couple of weeks has been the uncertainty of it all. And, both individuals and businesses need to make plans.
Oh, God forbid that there be uncertainty, right? Because if only we could have certainty, that would just make everything so much clearer. Because what people with power always like to do is fully disclose everything, right? People with power and pressure on them, right? They have to deal with all sorts of competing sources with all sorts of people hitting them here and there, and they will not be able to get anything done if they fully disclose. So this guy and Trump's critics in general, they want him to be clear and fully disclose because that way he'll never get anything done. I want Trump to get stuff done that improves the lives for Americans, for ordinary Americans. And whether or not he follows a checklist or whether or not he's clear, it doesn't matter to me nearly as much as improving the lives of ordinary Americans. But for this guy, improving the lives of ordinary Americans, that doesn't matter, right? What matters to him is following a certain process that makes him feel comfortable and just be clear, right? Like anyone in a powerful position who is confronting powerful opponents, they just become super clear because that's the way to go, right? A general fighting a battle, he just fully discloses his war plan, right? That's how we operate wars, right? We just fully disclose our war plans so the enemy knows what's going on. That if we have various weaknesses with our nation state and we're at war and we're fighting for our survival, well, it's really important, guys, that we just fully disclose, that we be really clear. It's important that the enemy knows where they can hit us and hurt us and stop us from doing anything good. If you have a noble agenda that will improve the lives of tens of millions of Americans, but if you fully disclose it and you're 100% clear about it, none of it will happen, well, at least you are clear. At least you follow the process, right? The lives of hundreds of millions of Americans will not benefit, but at least you follow the process and you're clear, right? To get things done, you cannot usually be 100% clear, right? To get things done, you cannot tell everyone everything. But this guy, he loves tariffs, but he doesn't like Trump's tariffs because he wasn't clear enough, guys. He didn't follow the process.
And what the policy he's articulated.
I just have contempt for these knee-jerk haters, whether they're on the right or the left, right? I will sit here and say the left is often right. I'll say that Elizabeth Warren is often right, that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a compelling personality, that Bernie Sanders has sometimes been right. The opposite side of the political spectrum from me is often right. I don't just have some knee-jerk contempt for the left. I don't have just some knee-jerk contempt for a leader of the political left, but people like this guy and people like Ben Shapiro, is his mirror image.
And his people have articulated in many cases different policies and different plans.
Oh my God. So there are members of his administration who are articulating different policies and different plans. God forbid that they are not all singing from the exact same hymn book. Right. There is a time and a place where it's good for people to be singing from the same hymn book. I like listening to music where people are singing from the same hymn book. But what's good for a choir, Steve, it's not necessarily good for a president of the United States. It's not good for a general leading an army. This is such a weak, ridiculous, pathetic critique. Now, why does this very smart, accomplished man make such a weak, pathetic, ridiculous critique? Right? Because he has so much contempt and hatred for Donald Trump. that he can't, all he can do is point and sputter. That's what Nathan Cofnas did in his blog post. All Cofnas could do was point and sputter a whole bunch of things that are just plainly empirically false, because Cofnas just loathes Donald Trump and MAGA. And this guy here, he loathes Donald Trump and MAGA, so all he can do is point and sputter.
And they still are, is not providing anybody with any certainty. We should be negotiating trade deals with our allies, but we should be negotiating them in a process that makes sense and that has a timeline and that we know what's going on, not a tweet that comes out after the market is collapsing.
Yes, because we all know that the key to successful negotiation in very difficult areas is to just fully disclose everything right up front. Hell no. That doesn't work in the real world. What a ridiculous comment. Of course you don't disclose everything. Of course you're not perfectly clear. Right? His advice here would never work in any substantial negotiation. Right? His advice is advice for failure. And maybe this guy has just become addicted to failure.
A tweet that comes out and then the market spikes up. It's too much uncertainty for people in the economy who run businesses, not just big businesses, but small businesses and small investors who have decisions they have to make.
Oh my God, guys, there are people in business, they have decisions they have to make. And if only Donald Trump would be open and honest and clear with them, then their decisions would be clear, right? Because Donald Trump's statements, Donald Trump's rhetoric, that's the only source of vagueness in the world. That's the only challenge for people making billion-dollar decisions. Let's imagine Donald Trump was perfectly clear, and then business has to make decisions. Well, when the West of reality is not perfectly clear, is it really that important whether or not the President of the United States is perfectly clear? It doesn't make that much of a difference. Let's say Donald Trump delivered perfect clarity. Tonight, the situation might change, and everything he might say that might hold true for this particular situation will be obviated by a change of situation which could happen in 1 minute from now. This idea that, if only the president was clear, then businesses could make rational decisions. People have to make decisions in a world where they lack full information. That's the way it has always been. That is the way it is now. That is the way it will always be. This notion that, if only Donald Trump was clear, then people would have full and complete information to make important decisions is a delusion. The world has never acted like that. The world does not act like that now. The world will never act like that in the future. Right? Even if Trump was clear and gave you a 27-page single-spaced model of rhetorical clarity, his position on tariffs, that would not remove the difficulty of making decisions in business. Right? The world is an incredibly confusing place. It is far more varied and complex than we can possibly understand. We will always be making decisions with incomplete information. Our relationships will always be changing because the people in our relationships are always changing. I'm going to be a different person tomorrow than I am right now, and I'll be a different person tomorrow depending also on the situation that I'm in, whether or not I get a good night's sleep, right? Whether or not I make money or lose money or have a health problem or win a friend, lose a friend. There are a million things that could happen to me that will substantially change who I am tomorrow, that will substantially change who the CEO of Apple is tomorrow. Right? This idea that, if only the President of the United States was clear, right, and that would enable business to make decisions. No, it won't. The President of the United States is only one factor in making decisions for leaders in business. He's one factor among hundreds of factors. Right? Let's say he's in the top 10, right? But there are at least 9 other equally important factors in making decisions. So this notion that if only the president followed a plan, and if only he consulted more with Congress, and if only he was clear, then people in business they could then make decisions. Right? This has absolutely nothing to do with the real world. We will always have to make decisions with imperfect information. You never get to escape from reality. You never get to escape from the situation where we're all locked in an iron cage together and we have to operate not knowing 100% certainty other people's motivations, Other people don't even know their own motivations fully, and we don't even know our own motivations. We're constantly changing. The situations we find ourselves in are constantly changing. Other people are constantly changing. All right? There's no magic key, bro.
If the market comes back, all the wealth is restored, shortly. Is there any cost to the American economy for doing it the way?
Yes, my rage has overcome my reticence. I was happy, right? I was living in a spiritual world. I was communing with the one-two creator. I was immersed in a world of Torah, of mitzvahs, of good deeds. I was living in a world of Gashmias, the spiritual realm, not the realm of Ruchnius, the material realm. I had stepped away from opining. I didn't need to live stream anymore. All right, I was in a holy and righteous place, right? But then I thought, 40, you've got to come down to earth. You got to help the people, right? You have got to extend your hand to your fellow American and battle for him against the elites who are trying to gaslight him, right? It is time to bring Brother 40's Traveling Salvation Show back to YouTube, to X, to Rumble, to Facebook, to Odyssey, right? I am here to preach the gospel. Here I stand. I can do no other, so help me God.
Way he's done it?
Yes, there's definitely cost because, again, if you're saying all the car companies need to onshore everything, which isn't really doable, but they...
Yes, that's what Donald Trump's saying. He said they have to onshore everything, absolutely every single thing. Wait, no, he hasn't said that. Nobody said that. It's a ridiculous thing to say. Nobody says that American businesses have to onshore every single thing. So this idea that MAGA wants to have some onshoring of American business, this must mean they want to onshore every single thing, every single ingredient, every little component of a car. Now MAGA is demanding that it's all be onshore. No, it's not. This is a world of delusion. I'm just ticked at the lies, the gaslighting, the obfuscation, the arrogance of these people who just say such complete nonsense, that the lack of humility at the incredibly complicated world that we live in, and just how their personal loathing for Donald Trump just distorts anything that this guy, Steve Elmendorf, can offer.
You can start to move stuff onshore. You have to, you don't just like build a factory in a week. It takes time and it takes investment to make a decision to build a factory and land to buy and lots of things to do.
Guess what? The longest journey begins with a single step. There are factories that owe their origins to a tenth of a second, right? A certain thing happened in somebody's head in a tenth of a second as a result of that thought that occurred in less than a second, right? 5 years later, you have 10,000 workers in a factory, right? That's how the real world works. People have a thought in an instant, in less than a second. As a result of that thought, they then go down a certain road that leads to factories employing thousands of Americans and improving the lives of millions of Americans.
And so the business likes to know what is the plan.
But we're not worse off on those issues now.
Oh, business likes to know what is the plan. Yes, we all like to know what is the plan, right? We would all love to have perfect information. Wouldn't that be great? It's not possible in this world, right? It only exists in his delusional fantasy. It has never existed in this life. It can never exist in this life.
Now than we were a week ago, are we?
You may be in that businesses are making decisions. They can't make decisions. We're better off if business understands what the rules of the road are, whether the rules of the road are something they like or don't like, but where we have some sense of what is the economy.
Oh, business cannot make decisions right now. And yet, businesses have been making decisions for the past week. Businesses have been making decisions. Businesses will make decisions tomorrow. Businesses will make decisions in 5 years and in 500 years. And there will never be a time when businesses will have the luxury of making decisions with 100% knowledge, with full information. It will never occur. Not in this world, not in this life, not in this planet. But you keep fighting for that delusional fantasy that can never happen in this world. And you keep blasting Donald Trump for not fulfilling your delusional fantasy that is completely impossible to occur in reality.
Economy going to be doing for the next?
Well, sure, but we know.
Oh, businesses can't make a decision unless they know how the economy is going to do for the next few months or the next few years, and yet they do. Businesses have been making decisions with imperfect information for millennia. They will continue to make decisions with imperfect information for millennia, even when their leaders do not make pronouncements with 100% clarity. And yet businesses and regular people will just keep on making decisions, even if their leaders do not bestow upon them 100% clarity.
Elected a president who's not consistent and linear.
That doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Okay, well,
I think some more consistency and being more linear would be good.
Well,
one other thing, Mark, I think.
Yeah, more consistency and more linearity. That is a good thing, except for those situations where less consistency and less linearity is superior. There's nothing inherently superior about a linear approach to doing things. Sometimes a nonlinear approach is more effective. Why would you blast the more effective nonlinear approach?
I need to point out, many people like to talk about how the markets don't matter to like anyone other than the rich. And the reality is, in our economy today, when people are...
Nobody claims that the markets do not matter. If they say that, they're only saying that as rhetorical overstatement. Right? The point is that Main Street and Wall Street are not identical, that Main Street and Wall Street have different interests, that under the first Donald Trump term, for the first time in 60 years, right, Americans without a high school education and Americans with only a high school education enjoyed a substantial increase in their earning power, and that Donald Trump is on track to bring about the same sort of thing in his second term. All right. There are some things that Main Street and Wall Street have in common, and there are some ways they are different. They're not identical. They don't have identical interests. Nobody is arguing what he just claimed, that what happens on Wall Street makes no difference. Right? Nobody thoughtful argues that. What they do say is that Wall Street is not the be-all and end-all of the American economy, that Wall Street should not be the only criteria for trying to help the American economy, that different groups have different interests, that different groups have different gifts. Wall Street's important. I am unaware of a superior indicator for future economic growth than the Dow Jones. Right? I used to argue that with Kevin Michael Grace. To the best of my knowledge, for as long as I've thought about this for 40 years, it has seemed to me that compared to the other leading economic indicators of which I am aware, the Dow Jones average is the best predictor of what's going to happen on Main Street in 6 months. Not perfect, but compared to the alternatives, is pretty damn good. That doesn't mean that the interests of Wall Street and the interests of Main Street are identical. Perhaps my point is just too subtle, too sophisticated, too nuanced.
Are in 401ks and don't have defined benefit pensions anymore, mostly. The markets are important to a lot of people. The markets are important to class people of all sorts who the loss of wealth and their retirement savings over the last weeks has been...
Nobody is arguing the market is not important. People are arguing it's not the only source of importance. It may not even be the single greatest sense of importance, right? This guy and his ilk for the past 2.5 months have been complaining that Donald Trump's only for the billionaires. Well, Donald Trump stuck it to the billionaires. You can no longer sustain the #1 Democratic Party line of attack on Donald Trump for the past 2.5 months. He's for the billionaires. He's against the working man. You can no longer claim that anymore. Donald Trump stuck it to the billionaires. He gave the billionaires the middle finger, right? And prior to a week ago, Steve Elmendorf would have used the critique, oh, Donald Trump, he only cares about the billionaires. Well, that lie has been exposed.
Really devastating psychologically and potentially economically.
I agree. But let me just play devil's advocate sophist with you for a minute.
Okay.
Let's say the moves of the last 6 days allow the president to make terms more favorable to the United States with many countries than he would have been able to make from a standing start a week.
Oh, no, Mark, that couldn't happen because Donald Trump is not operating with 100% rhetorical clarity. Mark, that couldn't happen because Donald Trump is not following my favored process. Oh, Mark, that couldn't happen because Donald Trump is not consulting adequately with Congress, right? Because Donald Trump is not being adequately linear and clear and consultative with Congress. Therefore, it's just empirically impossible for Donald Trump to arrive at any deals that might benefit the American public. Because, Mark, he's not following the process. He's not saying words like smart, educated people speak, like my peers speak, like university-educated people. He's not using careful, critical discourse. He's speaking in a crude way, Mark, and he's not following the process. He's not doing things like people in my social circle do things. So, therefore, it's just ipso facto impossible for him to do anything for the good of the American people. And you find that kind of lefty elite mainstream media argument credible? I don't. I think it's as weak as piss.
Week ago. That's possible, isn't it?
It's possible. It's also possible they make worse deals.
Right. Okay. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, now he says it's possible. Right. But absolutely nothing he says on this show provides any substance. Right. He has to logically admit it's possible. But you can see, right, his neck is tight and compressed. His head is thrust forward. His shoulders are rising up, right? He's in fight or flight. He is locked in. His world is narrowed to just hating Donald Trump, right? This is him, Steve Elmendorf, right? His body, his mind, his soul are all contorted by his hatred for Donald Trump.
It happens. Thank you, Steve. Always grateful for you being here. Bacha, thank you for being here. You've been pretty supportive. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You've been pretty supportive of the president's policies for the last week. Are you happier today or you were happier yesterday, and why?
Okay, first, I want to say two things before I answer that. The first is, Mark, the grace you have brought to this conversation in trying to, if there's like the divide between the people who see this.
Right, Mark Halperin's the only mainstream, well, he's not in the mainstream media, but better than any other show, he's tried to cover this topic fairly, right? He's not for protectionism. He's not for free trade. He's just tried to be fair, right? Halperin is doing something extraordinarily balanced.
As impacting everybody and the people like me who see this as Main Street versus Wall Street, the grace you have brought in trying to not caricature the position I have has made me want to be better. I haven't 100% succeeded in bringing that same level of grace because I'm a bit of a pugilist, but I just wanted to point that out and thank you for it because I watch it every morning and it really sets the tone, I think, for a lot of us in the industry. And the second thing I want to just say before I answer is the gap between the private messages I have gotten from thousands and thousands of
Okay, looking at the chat. Top down is how the world effing works. Well, in some examples, in some situations, right, as far as taking over institutions, yeah, it works top down. That's the only way the right can take over institutions. But other parts of the life work from the bottom up. Right, Bacha Unga Sargon. I mean, she's incredible. She's a Marxist and a leftist and MAGA.
Regular people across the country who have very little and are willing to sacrifice a lot for this agenda. And the wall-to-wall rage that's been directed at me from the expert journalist class is remarkable. Like there's just, I cannot even
If Donald Trump had simply issued executive orders against affirmative action and DEI, it would have been enough. Right, that was such a consequential thing for Trump to do. Elliot says in the chat, Trump has taken a sword to woke. Tariffs have a national security dimension. It seems absurd to depend on your geopolitical enemies for your economic well-being. Right, anyone who says I'm a process person should be sentenced to Guam. Well, there is a time and a place for putting protocols first and for putting process first. But as far as looking out for the well-being of the American people, right, process and protocols are useful, but they are hardly determinative.
Convey to you how different that, and that is the problem, I think, right there with our industry, is that the journalists are in the haves class. They don't get how most Americans see this, which is a lot of people with very little are willing to sacrifice quite a bit for the future of this country. And they see the people in Wall Street who will never not be rich whining about the kinds of sacrifices for the future of this country. So I just want to say that,
I love what you said. I agree with it. I think it's so important. You said it. The press bias on this is just out of control.
Out of control.
But you said it's most people in America, and I'm just quibbling with you. I'm not sure it's most.
I didn't say most. I said a lot.
You did. You misspoke. That's okay. You meant a lot.
I didn't mean to.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Live is live. But I appreciate what you're saying. And
yeah, and I think Colin Liddell has missed the boat in thinking that this new Trump administration is obviously idiotic and absurd. So Colin Liddell and Nathan Cofnas have the same perspective on the second Trump administration. This Trump administration may absolutely be a disaster. Trump's tariff policies may end up being a disaster, right? I'm in the middle. I don't have a strong commitment to free trade or to protectionism or to proclaiming that Trump is great or that Trump is bad, right? I'm in the middle with a favorable right now predisposition towards Donald Trump, but I'll turn on a dime if reality turns on a dime.
And as always, I'm encouraging people in our business to be a little self-reflective and just their failure to cover this. They act like they're everybody's Paul Gigot. Everybody is a Wall Street Journal editorial board.
And so how did we get here? Right? Why did people vote for Donald Trump? Why is it that tens of millions of Americans have a great deal of skepticism about what experts tell them? Did the choices of experts and of our elites have anything to do with that? Was there anything that our ruling class did, that university professors did, that our elites did, that our economic elites, business elites, arts elites, institutional elites, media elites, were there any things that they did that damaged the trust that Americans have in their institutions? Right? I would suggest to you, yes. Right? Donald Trump is a man of his time, of his situation. Donald Trump is the American people's retribution against elites. By and large, if you feel like you're well served by America's institutions, you vote for the Democratic Party. If you feel like you are not well served by America's institutions, you vote for Donald Trump. Why did this happen? Because of decisions made by our elites and our institutional leaders, and Donald Trump is a reaction to that. And John Podhoretz and the Commentary Magazine crew, right? And I'm a paleocon. I'm not a neocon, right? I do not have a Commentary Magazine worldview. I have a Chronicles Magazine worldview. To me, the paleocons effectively have been right about everything for the last 75 years. The paleocons have been right about everything for the last 75 years, right? I am down with the Chronicles Magazine perspective on life. I'm not down with the Commentary Magazine perspective on life. But when a communist, a leftist, a neocon makes a good point, I'm going to stand up and say that communist or that neocon, right, made a good point. John Podhoretz and the Commentary crew make some good points here from today's show.
Which is the Free Beacon has a piece out about how there is now evidence, or the Biden administration got a report in 2021 that said that at least 7 Americans contracted COVID in the fall of 2019, right? We originate the date of COVID, I believe, to late December.
So if I were president of the United States, or I was governor of California, or as a public health officer in some California county, right, I would have made decisions largely in alignment with what our leaders decided during COVID. But the difference is I wouldn't have tried to squelch discussion, and I wouldn't have tried to proclaim that I had more knowledge or certainty than I did. Right? I would say, based on the very limited amount of information that I have, I tend to believe that social distancing right now would be a good policy, that if you are inside during an influenza outbreak among other people, that probably be a good idea to wear a mask. But I wouldn't overstate and be as arrogant and just say ridiculous, contemptible things from a very lofty status speaking down to the plebs, right? Because of the arrogance of our elites and our leaders, right? That's why we have Donald Trump.
And this is where someone ate the theory was someone ate a bat and from the wet market in 29, got COVID, and then it spread like wildfire. And that this report that says 7 people got it in whenever that was, in September, October, which I think we'd heard tell of before in
people
some
have been speculating.
Well, people
about that.
this citizen journalism that was being done, looking at Chinese language files and things that were released.
And if you remember, there was a lot of pneumonia.
Would we have as much citizen journalism if mainstream journalism hadn't been so crappy in areas and so biased and so shoddy and so deceptive and hypocritical and lying and covering up, for example, about the obvious senility of Joe Biden? Right, Joe Biden has been displaying obvious signs of senility, right, since 2017, and the mainstream media covered it up. Ergo, people are increasingly turning to citizen journalists.
In that
Right.
fall that
Right.
people looking
Right.
back say, maybe
Right.
that was the beginning.
Right. But I only bring this up to say that, the greatest public health failure of our time, which gets into China and gets into establishment,
ever.
and gets into and gets into HHS and gets into the CDC and gets into Anthony Fauci, and then gets into this whole question of whether or not there was a concerted conspiracy among the people who do this work with viruses to suppress the truth about the virus, because it was going to come down on their heads and bring them into disgrace and world historical blame for having supported a policy of gain of function research that had been rejected and had essentially, we had been told, was not going to be done anymore because it was too dangerous. Nobody questioned that there was no skepticism about establishment ideas about health in 2020. And that means when you get to 2025, you have a guy who thinks that the measles vaccine, which has saved tens of millions of lives since its application, needs to be questioned, or fluoride needs to be questioned in the water. And again, it's the classic, you don't know what the consequences are going to be of your policy failures, but particularly if you try to say, shut up, he explained, about all of this, it's going to explode outward in forms and ways that
it was ground zero for not just rejecting the what we take for granted in terms of science and health. He even reaches out to the history stuff, to the Churchill was evil, was the real villain of World War II. Once the public turned on the public health establishment and saw through this web of whatever it was, cover-ups, denials, lies, then it became, what else have they been telling us that's not true?
Mm-hmm.
And who else has been lying to us about what? And it exploded out in every direction. I agree with you, John.
Well,
and as Abe said yesterday, it also paved the way for the power grab and the idea that we can live under emergency laws and whatever the status. So it also paved the way for the ability to do something about the suspicion that I can just call an emergency now and do the opposite of whatever it was I didn't like that they were doing 4 or 5 years ago.
And maybe to get to Matt's point about Trump's incredible aggression, rhetorical aggression, and now, tariff aggression toward China, maybe this is COVID. Maybe this is the way in which
make China pay,
we are making China. He doesn't, I don't know that he has this in his head.
No.
Or whatever. I don't think he
doesn't
does.
talk about COVID all that much anymore.
No, and I don't think in 2015 when he came out and said everybody's stupid about everything and has been stupid about everything the whole time and everything is stupid, which seemed to be a pretty, sort of,
that's a consistent theme of his as well. Yeah.
Well, my point is, was that how people were feeling about the financial meltdown 7 years later that was not properly adjudicated politically in the elections that preceded it? Yes. I mean, he mentioned it in terms of Iraq and
Obama's China policy was very appeasement oriented, right? China's peaceful rise.
But I'm just saying that we keep getting these things where policies seem to come out of nowhere. And, if Trump is operating against China in some weird expression of a national reckoning with China over not only its aggression and its effort to seize our manufacturing and our intellectual property, but also that it had this lab and it released a virus and then it didn't stop it and then it lied about it and then it never paid for it, and now it's going to pay for it in the form of 104% tariffs. He's not saying that that's where it comes from, but I don't know that 75 years from now the next Paul Johnson, who writes Modern Times about the 21st century, isn't going to adduce a connection between these two phenomena, wouldn't you?
I would. May I make the recommendation?
Please.
Well, as we were talking and we're making all these references, it occurred to me that there are many people in the younger millennial cohort as well as the Gen Z cohort who have not seen Dr. Strangelove or
board member or a billionaire, and that's the prism through which we should view it. And you praise me, I'll praise you. Your mental courage, professional courage, intellectual courage to say what you think and not worry so much about people attacking you is fantastic. One of the many reasons I admire you.
Well, I don't see most of it because I don't read my mentions on Twitter. But then sometimes someone I follow will be, and then you see. Okay, all right.
Answer your question. Are you happy with the change? Are you happy with the change, or you preferred yesterday?
I'm happy with the change. This is kind of what I think might be happening. Although, admittedly, this is a very generous reading of what just happened. It seems to me like under the advice of Scott Bessent, what Trump is now doing is pivoting, but he's pivoting to a position, I think, of trying to create almost a global embargo on China to the benefit of the U.S. And the way that he has done that is he sort of picked up a bat and said to the entire economic global order, that's a really nice stock market you have there. It would be a shame if something happened to it. And now they know the table stakes, right? When these people...
Oh, but gosh, that's acting like a thug. That's not acting with perfect rhetorical clarity. Ipso facto, that must be bad. To pick up a bat, we should never be violent. We should never pick up a bat. Why can't we just talk things out using university discourse?
People show up to negotiate, and he can now say, look, this is what we're doing. And I think, the criticism that you guys already brought up, which is that there were sort of conflicting things here, right? You can either reshore manufacturing or you can solve the trade deficits, but you can't do both, right? When you start making deals.
I disagree with that.
Okay, so I think that those are not in conflict at all.
They're not in conflict, all right? You can have improvements on all three levels. Oh, yeah, okay, there is some conflict and some synergy and some trade-offs, like the rest of life. Right? Life is nothing but trade-offs.
All because, of course, what we want is better deals with Europe, and what we want is for China to stop producing everything, right? So we want to reshore from China to have better deals with trading partners like Europe or, across the world. So to me, it seems like also each of these figures, like Lutnick, Bessent, Navarro, Musk, and Rubio, were each given a different rationale to go out and defend, right? So you had Lutnick...
Who's advising Trump on economics? It seems like the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who's the most accomplished member of his team, is the number one voice for Trump.
Making the reshoring argument, Bessent making the fairness and the Main Street argument, Navarro making the revenue argument, which, Mark, I totally agree with you. I think that the point of that was to get them through reconciliation and be like, look, we're going to bring in all this money. And as soon as that happened, I think Trump was going to, start making those deals. And then Musk just being the no, and then Rubio, the national security argument. And so each of them went out and had their role to play. And Trump was able to choose basically which of those won the day, which in the end was Bessent.
Right. So, Batya,
So sometimes it's good to have everybody singing out of the same hymn book, and sometimes it's better to have some conflict.
Would you characterize what the president's current position is on the tariffs?
I think he's trying to create a kind of soft global embargo on China to elevate U.S. manufacturing and to create...
Oh, but he's not perfectly clear, and he's being a thug, and he's using a baseball bat, and he's not always being very nice with his words. So how can we operate this way, guys?
The incentive to reshore. You played this clip of Elizabeth Warren this morning, and I think this actually is very important. She said, we actually really like the idea of tariffs, but you have to lay the groundwork first. You have to build the factories first. What factory was going to reshore voluntarily? How do you get them to do that? That's what Trump figured out, is there has to be multiple avenues to make this happen. No one is going to do that voluntarily. And of course, Elizabeth Warren did not have an answer for how you get them to do that voluntarily.
Right. Steve, I want to retrot a little bit of the ground we're already on. Leave aside the chaos, leave aside the fact you don't like Trump's policies in general. Mm-hmm. And leave aside...
So all he does is hate on Trump. So nothing useful from Steve.
Yeah, fine.
But they can give individual extensions. I just think for someone like you, who's been a supporter of great trade deals for the U.S. to try to deal with...
Right, this guy has been arguing for protectionism for decades. But when Donald Trump comes along and does it, it's like, oh, no, you're not following the process.
This systemic, decades-long unfairness. You don't like the way he ended up, but he's ended up in a place now where he's going to be negotiating from a position of strength, having scared the bejesus out of everybody.
We'll have to see what the deals are. And
we will.
against the unilateral authority that the president has on this. A lot of Republicans in Congress.
Oh, he's against the unilateral authority. I mean, I feel the same way. If some woman just unilaterally ever decided to have sex with me, or just unilaterally decided to give me a blowjob, or some employer just unilaterally decided to give me a job, or someone just unilaterally decided to hire me, or someone just unilaterally did a kindness for me, it's like I just said no, because they were all unilateral, and they should have been more consultative, and they should have done things by the process. Like, who the hell cares about the process compared to improving the lives of regular Americans? Right? This guy is just all up into the process. Right? Sometimes there are more important things than process.
Yeah.
Again, when I worked in the Congress, we had negotiated NAFTA, and it had to be voted on by the Congress. I think they should have.
Oh my God! If only every time a woman went to bed with me, she'd consulted the Congress, and it'd been a topic of negotiation, and I had been like 100% open and disclosive with her. How much more righteous that would have been.
Do deals that get voted on by the Congress. This unilateral trade authority to the president is not a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, I was thinking about this.
Oh, so he's not really into executive authority for presidents, but I bet he loved it when Democrats extended the power of the presidency. Right? The American people turn to the president to solve their problems. They don't primarily turn to the Congress or to the courts. They turn to the president. They look to the president. Right? And Democratic presidents, right, haven't been shy about using their power. Right? He is only mad because it's a Republican president using the power that he was thrilled when Democratic presidents used the same unilateral power.
This afternoon, I meant to raise it earlier, but I'll raise it now. And then we're going to get to your question, so please raise your hand if you want to be in the conversation. We've got one case, and the Chamber of Commerce was thinking about bringing another one to try to challenge the president's using this emergency authority.
Is that you should read The Maltese Falcon, because he reminds me of Sam Spade, the detective, where he just throws a wrench in the works, watches what happens, what people...
Right. I love being elliptical when I speak. Right. I love just kind of cutting it close so people don't know whether I'm being sarcastic, ironic, or unironic. And then I just love seeing how people react. Right. And I think Donald Trump is doing something similar. People give themselves away really easily.
People do, and then makes assumptions and decisions from there. And I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Everything he does, he just throws a wrench.
Yeah.
Chaos erupts. And
sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't work. Right. What matters to me is whether it works, not whether it follows a process.
And then he kind of like goes in a direction from there.
Yeah. That's great, the uncertainty that Steve loathes.
Don't have like a theory of mind, a coherent theory of mind as to why Trump did it. American president, pick them over Wall Street.
That wrench theory, Maltese Falcon reference.
I can tell you just how the people who reach out to me describe what they just witnessed, which is they never thought in their life.
She is such a powerful communicator, right? When she speaks, like, my heart is affected. I hear her in my head. I hear her in my heart. I'm not going to go into other parts of my body that are aroused when she speaks, because I'm a man of great respectability.
They would see an American president pick them over Wall Street, and the guts that took, and the not backing down. And I think it's very telling that the Democrats don't have like a theory of mind, a coherent theory of mind as to why Trump did it. Like, they're sort of the explanations you hear from Democrats about why he did it are kind of, they're insane. They're like, he's just insane. He's just trying to destroy, because for a decade, their only explanation for why he did anything was, well, he's on the side of the rich. He's doing it for his rich buddies. And here he was taking on the entire international global order on behalf of Main Street. Yeah. And they just there was a shock about that. And like, they'll never forget what that feels like.
Right. Steve.
Right. Even though Democrats for the past 10 weeks, Trump is only for the billionaires. Right. Ask Grok, why is the mainstream media's coverage on tariffs so incredibly one-sided? Grok tells me there's a big disconnect between the elite media and their disdain for Trump's tariffs and the popularity of Trump's tariffs with millions of Americans. And so these two groups have different priorities, different perspectives, and different incentives, right? Elite media, think outlets such as the New York Times, CNN, or The Economist, reflect the views of a cosmopolitan, hyper-university educated class that values free markets, global trade, and economic orthodoxy. They love expert consensus from economists who argue that tariffs disrupt supply chains, raise consumer prices, and invite retaliation. Right? The media loves to frame tariffs as reckless or populist. Right? Populist means reckless. Right? Means to have contempt for elites, often with a tone that assumes their audience already buys into globalization. Right? And they're also incentivized to oppose Donald Trump given their alignment with our institutions who are dominated by the left. Tens of millions of Americans, especially in deindustrialized regions like the Rust Belt, love tariffs because they feel screwed over by decades of free trade. They've watched factories close, jobs vanish to China or Mexico, and wages stagnate while corporate profits soared. Right? Free trade has been great for the rich, right? It may has had some benefits for the rest of America too, but it's also come with enormous price. There's nothing in economic orthodoxy. There's nothing in economics that says that free trade will equally benefit all parts of society. It's entirely possible with a completely orthodox economic perspective on this to recognize that free trade will create some winners for America and lots of losers, right? Tens of millions of Americans have overwhelmingly lost out due to free trade. Right? Over 60% of Americans support tariffs to protect domestic jobs. But you almost never get this perspective in the mainstream media. Most Americans support tariffs to protect domestic jobs. But that perspective is given favorable treatment about 1% of the time in the elite media. Right? The elite media see people who like tariffs as morons, uneducated, xenophobic, working class, icky people. Right. Why isn't our elite media even concerned about our working class? Forget tariffs. Just why is the elite media providing so little coverage and so little concern for America's working class? Right. Our media focus on affluent, educated audiences. They're completely disconnected from working class. Media outlets are staffed by middle and upper class individuals with elite educations. They are blind to working class issues. They prioritize sensationalism and the political agency of other groups, such as the professional managerial class, over working class concerns. They cater to a more affluent, educated audience who are into global trade and economic efficiency. They love free trade. They loathe protectionist policies that are popular with the working class. Right? The elite media focus on the top 5 to 10%, the professional managerial class. Right, there's very little socioeconomic diversity in newsrooms. Very few journalists come from working class backgrounds. The working class have limited political agency. They have very little influence over policy. And this woman here, Salena Zito, right, on the upper right, she didn't go to college. But she lives in Pennsylvania, and she has a valuable perspective.
As it applies to the discussion about tariffs and globalism.
So just for a minute, I have to fangirl. As someone who grew up in Pittsburgh and steel was everything, it was such an honor to be able to cover this. I mean, they have not let journalists inside this building for decades.
Where's the mill?
I was in West Mifflin, Pennsylvania, in the Urban Works, where the rolling steel mill is. It's 83 years old. It was so great to be able to be there, see what these men and women do, see the technology that they work with, but also how they work with their hands, and you just feel the heat from the furnace. It was really a humbling and joyful experience.
Beverly, the answer is probably no. But have you ever been in a steel mill?
I have not.
Okay, I have too. Salena, I compare it to the one time I went on an aircraft carrier. Yeah. Like, it's just an amazing visual experience to see people doing their jobs in a setting that is extraordinary with the heat and the power of the equipment. It's incredible. So sorry to interrupt, but I just want to validate what you said, because I went once and it was amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is absolutely amazing. All I can say is it's like it smelled like work, right? You just had you had this sense of
right, and you don't get this perspective very much in the elite media.
Something big was happening there. And so the reason that I went was twofold. I wanted to see how these guys felt about the Nippon deal. If anybody doesn't remember, Nippon put an offer in to buy U.S. Steel in December of 2023, and it sort of rocked the world. U.S. Steel was once the largest company in the world. It was the first billion-dollar company in the world. And then in its name itself, United States Steel was everything that you thought of about with America and that work ethos and building things like bridges and roads, but also aircrafts and tanks during the World War I and World War II, right? So there's just this sense of Americanism that belongs to this country. So the idea that a Japanese company was going to buy an American company that symbolized so many things, really initially the local union workers, local 227 steel workers were against it. And then they became skeptical. And then they started to do their homework. And they soon found that it was in their best interest that Nippon would buy them. They need a new rolling mill there. That rolling mill that I saw there is 86 years old, right? And they need new technology. They need to be more efficient. They need to be able to compete. And they were not going to get that from U.S. Steel. And U.S. Steel was point blank in telling them that. And so, and they started to be able to also get some more gimmies or more concessions from Nippon. A promise to build a new rolling mill, a promise to be there for at least 10 years, right? And a promise of investing anywhere from $2 to $7 billion. That it was made them change their mind about this deal. Now, who was against it? Joe Biden, the most adamantly, along with, I'm going to forget the U.S. Steelworker international president's name. He's out of Cleveland. He was against it as well. And so was Trump, but Trump was against it with nuance. You know, there's always this sense, it goes back to that quote that I said.
So if you're getting upset or outraged by the news, or you're just so mad that other people don't see things your way, you'd be far better off with the attitude of LOL, nothing matters. Yes, even nihilism has its place, right? With regard to things that are beyond your control, that little LOL, nothing matters, is a much healthier reaction than having the contempt that just oozes from people like Steve Elmendorf and almost everyone in the mainstream media when it comes to Donald Trump. This is just LOL, nothing matters with regard to things that are beyond your control, right? It loosens you up, helps you see the bright side of life, the light side of life. It helps you laugh, stop taking yourself so seriously. And Grok backs me up here. Nothing matters can be a sneaky bit of wisdom, right? It cuts through the noise. It lets you breathe. It is like a mental reset. Stop sweating the small stuff. Laugh at the chaos. Suddenly the world is less of a grind. There's a vibe to it. It's nihilism with a grin. Can flip a bad day into something that is fun, right? Notice how people who lead into this mindset end up lighter, more chill, more pleasant to be around, happier. It's not about giving up, right? It's about dodging the trap of overthinking every damn thing and taking responsibility for things that are not your responsibility and writing up tickets on your unenforceable rules when people are violating your rules, right? You just shrug and you just keep on rolling. LOL, nothing matters. Great attitude with regard to things beyond your control.
Voters take him seriously, but not literally. But reporters take him literally, but not very seriously. These guys believed there was nuance when he said no, that something was going to happen, that there was going to be a deal. Whereas Biden was just adamantly against it. And they thought of that as the end of their line. Now, in February, Trump met with the, is it Prime Minister of Japan? Is that what they're called? Okay. In the White House. And since then, Trump, Nippon, the Japanese, Howard have all been infuriated, and U.S. Steel have all been in very intense negotiations for something to happen there.
So why is the elite media so contemptuous of Trump's tariffs when tens of millions of Americans support them? I asked Grok. Says the elite media view Trump's tariffs as economically harmful, risking global trade wars. Americans support them for protecting jobs, promoting fair trade. Media criticism stems from an alignment with free market ideals. Public support for Trump's tariffs reflects economic populism, distrust of experts, and globalization. So we've got a cultural divide. The media see tariffs as reckless. Americans in the middle, all right, often view tariffs as vital for survival. And Batya Sangha Bacha Ungar Sargon. All right, got a PhD in English literature from the University of California at Berkeley, a Marxist and a leftist and MAGA.
I'd love for you to comment on that. Can you make the case that this was not Trump siding with Main Street over billionaires? Or
yeah, I don't think this is good for Main Street. I think if you look at many businesses, many small businesses, tariffs are not good.
100%. But I understand.
I dismiss, Mark, this whole notion that this is about Wall Street. Again, as I said at the beginning, I have a lot of friends I talk to too who are not rich and who don't live in Washington, in the stock market.
100%. And I think there are more people on your side than Bacha on this point.
Hey, thank you, Party Bots, $20 super chat. Thanks for the midweek stream, 40. Your clarity of vision and supreme epistemics are unmatched.
And there are people who own coffee shops, Mark.
100%.
Like, what are these tariffs going to do to my coffee?
Steve, 100%. But he did side against the billionaires.
Not all billionaires.
All right. Richard, thank you.
Oh, my God. He didn't side against all billionaires. All right. No matter what Trump does, right, Steve Elmendorf would just viscerally hate him.
My best. Richard.
I try my best to zoom out from like the media prism of like what's happening now and kind of have a historical context. But 5 years ago, Wall Street was perfectly fine with shutting down both the global economy and Main Street forcefully with police powers.
Yeah.
And so when they're critical of things like this, I'm just like, it's not my first rodeo.
Yeah.
We've done worse.
Yeah. Richard, thank you. Great points. Love having you on. Thank you so much. Matthew, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind, please.
I'm from New York in macroeconomics, but it seems...
So just listening to this guy's voice, right, just looking at him, physiognomy, right, this guy's a leftist who just has Trump derangement syndrome.
To me, pretty elementary that if you want to help Main Street, and I appreciate the deindustrialization of America and how profoundly that has hurt Main Street in America, it suggests to me that the way to do that is with an industrial policy. It is not to do it by imposing tariffs.
He fails to understand why people might want to use tariffs.
Understand how it is by taxing the importation of goods. And by the way, I completely appreciate...
So every other nation that's gotten rich has done it in large part through taxing the importation of goods, through the use of tariffs. Every nation that fights for its survival uses tariffs, right? But he doesn't understand, right? It's just completely befuddled, even though every single example we have of a nation state getting rich is done through tariffs and substantial levels of protectionism. And when a nation fights for its survival, it uses tariffs and protectionism. But he's just completely befuddled. He can't understand why every single empirical example in history, every single damn thing that we know of that's helped a nation grow rich or survive a difficult war has done it through tariffs. But he just can't understand why anyone would want to use tariffs. You can't understand because you don't want to understand, right? A mild interest in history would help you understand.
How are we bringing back the great glory days of the 1950s when America still was the leading car manufacturer simply by imposing tariffs? Is it the way to compete?
The United States became the richest country in the world by the 1880s with a heavily protectionist policy that was pursued until after World War II. The United States remained the richest country in the world under a highly protectionist trade policy for more than 70 years.
Internationally by investing in infrastructure.
I'm not saying protectionism is the way to go, right? I'm not saying that free trade is bad. I'm just simply pointing out the empirical, obvious, stinking obvious reality that you have to be completely committed to a fantasy rather than reality to not notice that every single nation has become rich through employing protectionism.
Structure by investing in education, by making our workers the best and the brightest in all of the world.
Oh! Yes, why don't we make our workers the brightest people in the world? Why don't we use policies that raise their IQ? Because there aren't any. You can't do it. It can't be done. It's an impossibility. You're the moron here, thinking that we can make our workers the brightest in the world. You can't take someone with an 80 IQ and give him a 140 IQ. Right? That's the stupid, ridiculous thing that passes for profound commentary in elite discussions. Why don't we invest in raising our population's IQ? Can't be done.
And incentivizing businesses to locate here rather than tariffs, isn't that the best way?
Great question. Bacha and then Steve. Thank you for that, Matthew.
Great question, and also thank you for your kind words. Donald Trump is not a leftist. He is a protectionist. And so I think this is the thing with the Elizabeth Warren. Like, there's only one way. If you are not a leftist, there's only one way to get businesses to behave in a certain way. I guess there's two ways. There's the carrot and then there's the stick. And I think in Donald Trump's mind, tariffs are kind of a little bit of both. They create a massive incentive because it's going to become more expensive if you don't do it. If you don't start reshoring, there's going to be costs associated with that. And then, of course, he promised to bring down the corporate tax to 15% for anybody who brings manufacturing back here. And I'll just note, it's already working. I mean, he's already attracted $1.2 trillion in manufacturing committed since his inauguration. So it's already sort of working and doing that promised thing. Industrial policy is great. I'm a leftist, so I love that stuff. Sure, let's throw money at the problem. But he's a Republican. And so they're thinking, what can we do that to use the market itself in order to make businesses behave in the ways that we want them to? Is there a way that we cannot use the force of the government, but rather an incentive structure to get out of this codependent relationship with China, which has been just disastrous? And this is the thing about it. We all agree on what the problem is, right? But there's just no other compelling solutions that I have heard.
And Brandon says tariffs are akin to mafia extortion protection money. Now, why do we have the mafia? Because the mafia are a more effective way of getting things done compared to alternatives in many situations, right? I don't love the mafia, right? I don't want more of the world operating under the mafia. I respect reality, and reality shows me that in many situations, the mafia, right, having a mafia is the most effective way of getting things done, right? I would rather live in a world of peace and love and kindness and understanding. Unfortunately, much of reality is inimical to that, and in some parts of reality, being connected to a mafia is the best way to go. And if the United States has to use mafia-like tactics to advance its interests and to promote its prosperity and its chances of survival in a dangerous world, then to me, that's not the worst thing.
I mean, the Democrats kind of gave up on this. And so, I think for him, the tariffs do a whole bunch of things at once. They make it expensive not to manufacture here. So we have the reshoring piece, the national security piece. I mean, if you think about it, China is our greatest adversary, and we literally rely on them to build the ships we would need in order to fight them if, God forbid, it ever came to that. It's crazy. They exported, maybe by accident, maybe not, a bioweapon, basically, and we relied on them for the pharmaceuticals and the vaccines to fight it. It's insane, but no one's talking about it. You have to make it so that these companies, through their own free will, have enough incentive, carrot or stick, to stop behaving in the way that their shareholders want them to, because it makes the biggest profit. That's kind of, I think, the argument behind the tariffs.
Okay, chat says, I consider mafia extortion a scum. I think it's a more useful attitude to look at the world through the eyes of awareness and understanding. Why do we have mafias, right? Because they are the most effective ways of getting things done in certain situations. So don't hate the player and don't hate the game. Recognize that in certain situations, right, certain tactics work better, and in other situations, different tactics work better. Now, back to Salena Zito, right? She didn't even go to college.
And I don't know what it would look like. I suspect it's going to look more like a partnership. Or a deal, something that keeps that U.S. Steel name. But this is...
So she writes a monthly article for the Washington Post, and my friend says, in a sane world, journalism schools would be competing with each other to bring her in for a semester as a visiting professor. It's wonderful that she is so successful coming out of her background. Hope this article she wrote about her decade with Donald Trump is widely read by anti-Trumpers. She's got a book coming out. It shouldn't make anyone who's opposed to his policies any friendlier toward him, but at least people might stop demonizing him.
It's very, I cannot express to you guys enough how important this is in Pennsylvania. Think about what the name of our football team is. It's not the Pittsburgh UPMCs, right, which is the largest employer, which is a medical entity, a series of hospitals. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Even though, most people have never even been in a steel mill, that association, that cultural association with that idea of steel being made here is deeply important, and it impacted people's votes in a way that, in a nuanced way, and especially in the suburbs, that people don't understand. I mean, you may have not worked there, but your grandfather did, or your great-grandfather, or your neighbor, or whatever. We are culturally associated with steel. Our number one beer in Pittsburgh is called Iron City. right? I mean, everything is about steel. So the saving of this company became a nuanced thing in the election cycle. And it has continued as Trump continues to project that a deal or a partnership will happen. It continues to solidify his support in this state as opposed to erode it. And that goes to tariffs. Tariffs are very important in the steel industry. Cheap steel, steel dumping, all of those things have impacted these lives, these communities. If you drive around Western Pennsylvania, two towns like McKeesport, where Chris Lesavita is from, or Aliquippa, and you see miles and miles of empty steel mills, you are constantly reminded of what was taken away from you. How many people left? How many family members left? And so that's why it's much more nuanced than people understand, but that's why tariffs
right now. Now, I do think it's very interesting that, as you were saying earlier, Mark, the administration isn't all on the same page. So you see this fighting take place in the public square. I actually think Trump doesn't mind that. He likes people to battle it out and then take the best idea. But in general, when it comes to these negotiations, I do think it's great for people to come to the table. By the way, nobody could question whether or not he works a lot of hours. He's a hard worker. Clearly, he's doing that, and that this is now his economy. But will he make these deals? That is the question. That's what people are hoping for who are supportive of him. But there are a lot of people in the Republican Party who are keeping quiet right now, a little bit scared. This obviously is very different than the free trade perspective that Republicans have. It's been interesting to see the Wall Street Journal comment on Trump's style and his policies. National Review Online has been saying a lot of things. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more Republican elected officials speaking out as time goes on. If the deals don't come to a head and they can sign and make them fair trade deals, again, this is short-term.
I think you're making the leftist argument about
with Japan.
I think he has had a consistent position for a long time, which is we should try and negotiate fair and free trade deals with other countries. They should be negotiated in such a way that they have protection for labor, that they have protection for the environment, that we are raising the standard of living for all the world, not bringing the standard of living down.
Yes, it'd be wonderful to live in a utopia. But if Trump can just move the ball forward, all right, that's a good thing, even if we don't have all the processes and standards here that he wants.
Tariff issue, but it's an issue of equity. But what I'm talking about is the Japanese domestic economic system, where it was impossible to penetrate because of bureaucratic rules that were intended to keep America from trading there. Right.
Right.
You talked about that. And I'm saying is to try to find a little commonality here is Donald Trump is, unlike every president who's been president since 1988 when Dick Gephardt ran and lost, Donald Trump has a theory of the case that says the way to deal with the non-tariff barriers is to have leverage over these countries to say no muss. There's no more hiding behind these bureaucratic rules that are designed insidiously to keep us out. And I'm going to negotiate that. Now, you're right. We have to wait and see if he actually does. But to me, you, at least part of you, should be celebrating the achievement of the Gephardt desire to unmask all these insidious things.
And then I'm for negotiating.
Again, I think it's 50%. I think it's 50% bond market, 50% rich people, 50% reconciliation.
Okay, so I was disturbed by what's been going on in the bond market. All right, I was keeping an open mind about Trump's tariffs moves, but as Treasury 10-year notes started demanding higher and higher yield, so it went up to 4.5 as opposed to a few days ago when it was just 4.0. Right, what was going on with the bond market? That's what started freaking me out in the last 24 hours about Trump's tariff moves. That was unsustainable, what was happening in the bond market.
But David, I understand it'll be good for working people. That's his stated desire. So as much as you dislike Donald Trump, do you want to be optimistic that maybe we have an American president who's a populist, who talks like Bernie Sanders on a range of issues, and maybe he'll actually deliver for working people? Don't you think it's
very significant decisions have a real impact on the economy, and not just on Wall Street, but have a real impact on regular people, all people, have a real impact on small businesses, on elderly people, on everyone, it's not the way to run the government. I know that
working class, the multiracial working class.
Hopefully you can cheer them up.
Trump won with people who make under $100,000 a year. It's, he won the working class, the multiracial working class, 25% of Black men, but the majority of Hispanic men. It's a very working class community. So, and we know that about half of Americans have a 401k. So certainly there's like some overlap there between people who are, working class and have a 401k. But like most people who don't have 401ks, like people are really broke. And like, if you're broke, like seeing the braying on Wall Street and comparing how Trump just went out day after day and said, kiss my butt, to what Obama did in the 2008 financial crisis, where they bailed Wall Street out and they let people just lose their homes. That is, I think, what it looks like to Main Street. And like the economic theory here, it may not work out. Like we may not be able to reshore like thousands and thousands of factories. He will get better trade deals. But again, I think the imagery there of him standing with the little guy, like that is how the little guy sees this, and him giving the finger to the billionaires who actually like went out on a limb and alienated all of their rich Democrat friends and supported him. Like there is something about that is just like, I didn't think, I and many other people did not think that kind of an image was possible in this country again, that a person with power did not feel that they had to consult Wall Street before doing anything. And again, just this divide of hearing from people who have nothing, who keep saying, you know what, I'm willing to pay more for things if it means my kids have a future. And then the richest people who, no matter how this goes, will never not be rich, braying about losing money, which is never going to impact how their lives actually look. Like that is what this moment signifies to me.
David, thank you. Grateful to you. National security and having good paying jobs in the United States.
I think that varies country by country, Mark. I think it varies deal by deal. Because again, I don't think we should have a
predictor for whether people approve of this or not.
Into the soul of his fellow Americans. Are you able to solve this mystery?
I am. I think if you means tested this, the $100,000 a year would be a good marker, but also a college degree is going to be the number one predictor for whether people approve of this or not, because globalization really hurt people who work with their hands and really benefited people who have a college degree. If you work in the knowledge industry, you are the consumer of low wage labor. So mass migration helped you a lot, and you're the consumer of cheap goods from China, and you didn't pay the price. You didn't lose the factory. You didn't lose the ability to have the American dream, basically. Like the problem is that working class people, they're not poor, but their purchasing power since the 70s has plummeted because the cost of the things that guarantee a middle-class life, like the most modest version of the American dream, a home, a retirement, healthcare, and an education, have absolutely skyrocketed between 400 and 1,000%. So people are working unbelievably hard, sometimes 2-3 jobs, and yeah, they're making $70,000 a year instead of 30, but they can never afford to be homeowners. And there's only one way to fix that, which is you can't like redistribute your way to that, to the dignity of being able to work really hard and buy a home for your family and retire in dignity. The only way to fix that is to have the market supply them with higher wages. It's the only way. And what happened was, it used to be like doctors married nurses and lawyers married secretaries. And so the median price of a home, look, I'm talking specifically like where we live, like, in the coast, right? You can be very poor in West Virginia and afford to buy a home. I'm talking about other areas where there's opportunities and jobs. The price of a home used to be tagged at like, a nice middle class income plus. But today what happened is the top 10% marries each other. Now those doctors marry doctors and those lawyers marry lawyers. And Elizabeth Warren wrote the book on this, The Two Income Trap. So the entire housing market is now at the price point that those two doctors can afford, meaning that their cleaning lady can't even afford to rent in their neighborhood. Like what Trump is doing, it's so obvious. He's taking the spigot that was pointed upwards to the top 10% who control over 60% of the GDP now, and he's just going like that. So if you're in that top 10%, 20%, if you have a college degree and a 401k, you're really upset because you've been benefiting all this time. But if you're totally broke because you know that your grandparents worked in the meatpacking plant or in the factory and they were able to afford a middle-class life on $30,000 a year, and now everybody in your community is broke, like you're seeing this and you're like, what have I got to lose? Maybe it'll work.
Cody, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. If you don't want to answer, you just say pass. Ready? Do you have...
Okay, Steve Saylor has weighed in, and Steve Saylor's attitude here is pretty close to mine. It says, for weeks I've been feeling guilty about not delivering my magnum opus take on Trump's tariffs. Then again, I've never had much of a take on tariffs. Having majored in college in economics, I absorbed the free trade orthodoxy, but in the later 20th century it kept emerging that reasonable leaders wanted to put reasonable thumbs on the scales of trade. For example, the Northeast Asian governments wanted their firms to dominate the world automobile market, and the firms worked hard to deserve that domination. Still, many other countries did not want to see them fully succeed. Most countries wanted to maintain some automobile manufacturing. Even the ideological free trader Ronald Reagan imposed some import quotas, which led the Japanese car makers to build assembly plants in the U.S., which I think is good for America. The U.S. has had a 25% tariff on pickup trucks for 60 years. which seems to be highly popular with pickup truck fans. All right, these kind of pragmatic compromises struck me as reasonable. I lost my faith in the economist dogma of free trade, but I never developed much enthusiasm for tariffs either. Over the decades, I've mostly lost interest in providing opinions about economic questions. I wish we'd done more at the turn of the century to slow offshoring to China. A simple 10% tariff on everything was a defensive way to slow outsourcing and throw some grit in the gears of the rise of China. Why not a moderate universal tariff? Slow the rise of a strategic rival and allow more American factory workers to finish out their careers doing what they know how to do. Perhaps we should have treated Mexico as our China, as our low-wage platform for polluting industry, but one that would never be a military threat to the U.S. Fortunately, we did not do many things to slow the decline of American manufacturing. So now if you want to rebuild America's manufacturing, you can't use moderate defensive steps. You have to undertake a carefully considered, broadly supported, multi-year plan to rebuild certain supply chains within the U.S. It's like Christian nationalism. All right. The United States over the past, since Obergefell, the last decade, has become increasingly anti-Christian. For Christians to maintain their communities in an increasingly anti-Christian America, they have to engage in Christian nationalism, which was unnecessary in the 1950s. So Christian nationalism may sound scary, but it may well be the only way for Christians to maintain their Christian communities in the United States. All right, now Christians have to take drastic measures. My God, they might have to bully. They might have to wield earthly power. They might have to be tough and nasty. What's that Netflix show about the Mormons set in the 1850s that I loved? Netflix show about Mormons, American something, 1850s. American Primeval, all right? In brutal situations, you have to act brutally to survive. The world is often brutal. America's survival is more important to me than what process it follows and whether it's consorting with its allies and with its Congress, right? The safety, survivability, and prosperity of Americans is more important to me than these process questions, right? American primeval is how much of the world is much of the time. It's a brutal place. And in brutal situations, sometimes the only way to survive is by acting brutally with regard to outsiders. And one acts blindly with blind love towards your in-group. Right? Much of the time, your optimal survival strategy is to display blind love towards your in-group and blind skepticism towards outgroups. Sometimes in brutal worlds, you have to engage in brutal choices to survive. All right, we're all locked in an iron cage together, and sometimes the situations we're in are awful, right? They're incredibly challenging. I wish we could just be all peace and love all the time and just love, 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 right? Wouldn't that be nice? But sometimes reality does not allow that.
Do you have a college degree?
Yes.
Do you own a home?
Yes. It's the elite slush fund because everybody's retirement is forced to be in this pool for the elite to pump and dump and bring, you know what I mean? This last week was just a dump. And then what did the elites do? They went back in there and they bought the lows, and now they're pumping it back up. So, you know, the 401k is a Ponzi scheme, I think, because
right. If you don't have a 401k and you don't own real estate, the last 4 years have been brutal, absolutely brutal. So, building new factories, it takes time, but some of the decisions can be made in a blink of an eye, right? You can redirect incentives to create more factories and more reshoring, right? You announce tariffs, they'll be imposed, and industry can adjust. Now, enunciating a long-term plan that carefully distinguishes high-priority industries from low-priority industries, building broad support for the plan, and sticking with it year after year, these are not among Trump's talent skills, right? He likes making deals. The more startling, the better. So it's hard to see how imposing tariffs today to reap the benefits years down the road due to massive investments in state-of-the-art factories would happen under Trump. Trump's personality, his age, his mercurialness, second-term status don't seem well-suited to that kind of confidence-inducing long-term program.
Term versus long term, where are we going to be? But I do think him making deals is going to be an important aspect of that, and I just don't think we know what those deals look like yet.
Is it important that the deals bring manufacturing back to the United States, or is it enough to simply level the playing field on free trade?
I think for most people, it's going to be leveling the playing field. And here's the reason why, is even when you take a look at car manufacturing, it's a very global market. Very few cars, I think,
All right.
Come on.
This country, even in Greenville, I live right down the road from BMW, the largest American plant that we have here. And you usually think of BMW, okay, German vehicles, but it employs a lot of American workers. So I think the way we look at manufacturing is much more nuanced and layered these days, and we work in a global way. And if you're looking at some of these tariffs taken into effect that Trump has talked about, we were talking about cars going up maybe up to $4,000 or $5,000, if not even more, on cars when they've already gone up so much during the era of COVID. And that's what I don't think people are going to be okay with. It's going to disrupt the market quite a bit.
Okay, I've forgotten why I picked these videos.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yael Hungerford, the Executive Director.
Okay.
Let's turn to the defense sector, where you argue for more traditional industrial policy consisting of Buy American requirements,
Miran.
tariffs, and increased investments in R&D.
Yeah.
I'd like to push you on your contention that shoring up production is in our national security interest. For reasons of self-interest, aren't nations whose economies are mutually intertwined and dependent less likely to go to war with one another? By contrast, might tariffs and other measures you recommend be seen as an act of aggression?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so what I'd say is, sorry, I think I've lost the.
Come on, man! I'm trying to run a high-quality show.
So I turn to industrial policy for the defense sector because, as I was saying before, I think it's the place where you're on the strongest economic grounds for having an industrial policy at all, right? National security, peace.
All right, this is Stephen Miran, Harvard PhD in economics. He is the chair of Trump's Council of Economic Advisors.
The existence of institutions, like I was saying before, are sort of prior to markets. They're upstream of economics. You can't have markets if you have bombs raining in the street and you're an occupied country or whatever, right? And you have to pay tribute to Rome or whoever. So therefore, industrial policy is appropriate, I think, in the defense sector. And it's a much, much, much harder leap to make to argue that it would be appropriate in other sectors of the economy, as the Bidenomics agenda is doing with sort of the climate stuff and actually in many parts of the economy. I'm not a political scientist. I think that there are people who really study the effect of trade on war. From my casual observation, and I'm happy to hear if there's any people on the line who study this. I'm happy to hear that this is wrong, but I don't know that I think that increased trade really decreases. With all due respect to Adam Smith, I don't know that I think that increased trade reduces the risk of war. I mean, if you think about World War I, the world was at a localized, globalization, local max, right, local peak when World War I happened. And on the eve of World War I, there's this famous quote that sort of Keynes was writing about all the things that you could get in London before you leave your bed, about sort of the tea from China and the silver from Germany and wherever, and you're writing letters to people in Paris, and sort of globalization was sort of in full steam ahead, and that didn't stop the breakout of war. And if you think about the opposite side, like the Cold War, where we had zero war, very minimal trade beyond the Iron Curtain. The Cold War by and large remained cold and not hot, right? So maybe it's the case that Adam Smith is right, but I don't know that he was. And in fact, if anything, I think that the progress we've made in the game theory of this stuff has been super.
Right before World War I, England's number one trading partner was Germany. Germany's number one trading partner was England. Yet they went to war.
Right. And, I'm a believer that deterrence matters. Right. And that the best way of avoiding war is to just be so scary that people are terrified of looking at you the wrong way because they're terrified you'll blast their heads off.
Oh, no, you can't be scary. That's thuggish. That's low IQ. Stephen, that's so low IQ. I know you've got a PhD in Harvard, but you're an example of what Nathan Cofnas talks about, low human capital. This is fascism. You're talking about using force and being scary. That's thuggish. That's like the mafia, bro.
If you do. So, I think that deterrence, so I think the game theory basically teaches us that deterrence is the best means of maintaining.
Wait, I thought deterrence was being like Hitler. Nathan Cofnas told me that operating with deterrence was like being like Hitler. It's like being low IQ and fascist. Gosh, here we got a Harvard PhD, but he must be low human capital according to Nathan Cofnas, because he's talking about using thuggish, scary tactics to keep America safe. Oh boy, so scary, so low IQ.
Peace. And so if people are so scared to go to war with you, I think that's the best effective thing. And I think that if you
look, Nathan Cofnas is Stephen Miran, PhD from Harvard University, the chair of Trump's Council of Economic Advisors. Tell me, mate. Tell me he's low human capital. Is this what you mean by low human capital? This guy here talking about this scary, fascist, thuggish approach to navigating reality?
If you look at the history of, the Iranian, centrifuges, right? Like, when did they ever really stop, right? It was right after the U.S. invaded Iraq, because they were terrified that they would be next.
Oh, no, they stopped building their nuclear program because they were terrified that the United States would invade them. Oh, that's so low IQ. That's thuggish. That's fascist, says Nathan Cofnas. You shouldn't try to intimidate people out of building nuclear weapons. That's low human capital.
Right? And when they were scared of that threat was the only time that they ever really stopped enriching uranium in the course of the last 40.
Whoa, so you mean it's good to make your enemies scare you? I thought that was a low IQ approach. Nathan Cofnas says this is a low IQ approach. This is fascism.
40 years type of thing. That might be right, and I'm very happy to hear from any people who study this that globalization really does prevent war.
Yeah, it sounds great in theory. Globalization, free trade prevents war. Just we don't have much evidence in reality for it.
I'm not sure I believe it.
Yeah. Okay, I had another clip here. Same bloke, Stephen Miran. Good bloke.
Today, I'd like to discuss the United States provision of what economists call global public goods for the entire world. First, the United States provides a security umbrella, which has created the greatest era of mankind.
Oh, wow. So the U.S. provides public goods for the rest of the world, but it shouldn't try to get compensated for that, because if the United States tries to get compensated for providing public goods for the rest of the world, that's low IQ. So only someone with low human capital would make this argument. All smart people, all people with any amount of human capital, they don't think this way. I know. Nathan Cofnas told me so.
It's the greatest era of peace mankind has ever known. Second, the U.S. provides the dollar and treasury securities, reserve assets which make possible the global trading and financial system, which has supported the greatest era of prosperity mankind has ever known.
All right, this is Stephen Miran. All right, another part of MAGA's low IQ, low human capital group, according to Cofnas. Chair of Donald Trump's Council of Economic Advisors, speaking 2 days ago at the Hudson Institute. Just another low IQ fascist moron with no human capital.
These are costly to us to provide. On the defense side, our men and women in uniform take heroic risks to make our nation and the world safer, preserving our liberties generation after generation. And we tax hardworking Americans mightily to finance global security. On the financial side, the reserve function of the dollar has caused persistent currency distortions and contributed.
You have to be the moron if you think that there is no intellectual case to be made for tariffs and protectionism, right? I'm not here saying that free trade sucks. We should have super high tariffs. But to take the Nathan Cofnas approach that use of tariffs means that you're low IQ and a fascist at heart, right? To me, that's the moronic perspective.
Along with other countries' unfair barriers to trade, to unsustainable trade deficits. These trade deficits have decimated our manufacturing sector and many working-class families in their communities to facilitate non-Americans trading with each other.
Whoa, having concern for the welfare of Americans, that's low IQ, bro.
Clarify that by reserve currency, I mean all the international functions of the dollar, private savings and trade included. I've often used the example that when private agents in two separate foreign countries trade with each other, it's typically denominated in dollars because of American status as the reserve provider. That trade entails savings housed in dollar securities, often treasuries. As a result of all this, Americans have been paying for peace and prosperity, not just for themselves, but for non-Americans too. President Trump has made it clear that he will no longer...
And seriously, Nathan Cofnas wants us to believe that this is a moronic, low IQ, fascistic argument. Seriously? That's the moronic argument. To have contempt for this person's point of view, to have contempt for this argument, to just dismiss it outright, that's the moronic approach.
...stand for other nations free riding on our blood, sweat, and tears, whether in national security or trade. The Trump administration has already, in its first 100 days, moved forcefully to reorient our defense and trading relationships to place Americans on fairer ground. The president has promised to rebuild our broken industrial base and pursue trade terms that put American workers and businesses first. I'm an economist and not a military strategist, so I'll dwell more on trade than on defense, but the two are deeply connected. To see how it works, imagine two foreign nations, say China and Brazil, trading with each other. Neither country has a currency that is trusted, liquid, and convertible, which makes trading with each other challenging. However, because they can transact in US dollars backed by US treasuries, they are able to trade freely with each other and prosper. Such trade can only occur because of the US military might, ensuring our financial stability and the credibility of our borrowing. Our military and financial dominance cannot be taken for granted, and the Trump administration is determined to preserve them. But our financial dominance comes at a cost. While it is true that demand for dollars has kept our borrowing rates low, it has also kept currency markets distorted. This process has placed undue burdens on our firms and workers, making their products and labor uncompetitive on the global stage, and forcing a decline in our manufacturing workforce by over a third since its peak, and a reduction in our share of world manufacturing, 40%. We need to be able to make things in this country, as we saw during COVID, when many of our supply chains could not survive without being reliant on our biggest adversary, China. We clearly should not rely on our biggest adversary for equipment essential to keeping our population safe and secure. Nor should our biggest adversary be allowed to benefit so much from an international security and financial architecture we finance. There are other unfortunate side effects of providing reserve assets. Others may buy our assets to manipulate their own currency to keep their exports cheap. In doing so, they end up pumping so much money into the US economy that it fuels economic vulnerabilities and crises. For example, in the years running up to the 2008 crash, China, along with many foreign financial institutions, increased their holdings of US mortgage debt, which helped fuel the housing bubble, forcing hundreds of billions of dollars of credit into the housing sector without regard as to whether the investments made any sense. China played a meaningful role creating the global financial crisis. It took almost a decade to recover until President Trump got us back on track in his first term. In my view, to continue providing these twin global public goods, there needs to be improved burden sharing at the global level. If other nations want to benefit from the US geopolitical and financial umbrella, they need to pull their weight and pay their fair share. The costs cannot be solely borne by everyday Americans who have already given so much. The best outcome is one in which America continues to create global peace and prosperity and remain the reserve provider, and other countries not only participate in reaping these benefits, but they also participate in bearing the costs. By improving burden sharing, we can enhance resilience, preserve the global security.
Seriously, you want to tell me this is a moronic, low IQ, fascist approach? Seriously? You really want to maintain that line of thought, that absolute contempt for any element of protectionism and use of tariffs?
Security and trading systems remain the reserve provider for many decades into the future. Moreover, it is critical not just for fairness, but for capacity. We are under siege by hostile adversaries trying to erode our manufacturing and defense industrial base and disrupt our financial system. We will be able to provide neither defense nor reserve assets if our manufacturing capacity is hollowed out. The president has made clear that the United States is committed to remaining the reserve provider, but that the system must be made fairer. We need to rebuild our industries to project the strength needed to preserve reserve status, and we need to be able to pay our bills to do so. What forms can that burden sharing take? There are many options. Here are a few ideas. First, other countries can accept tariffs on their exports to the United States without retaliation, providing revenue to the U.S. Treasury to finance global public goods provision. Critically, retaliation will exacerbate rather than improve the distribution of burdens. That might make it even more difficult for us to finance global public goods. Second, they could stop unfair and harmful trading practices by opening their markets and buying more from America. Third, they could boost defense spending and procurement from the United States, buying more U.S.-made goods and taking the strain off our service members and creating jobs here. Fourth, they can invest in and install factories in America. They won't face tariffs if they make their products in this country. Fifth, they could simply write checks to Treasury. That would help us finance global public goods as well. Tariffs deserve some extra attention. Most economists and some investors dismiss tariffs as counterproductive at best and devastatingly harmful at worst. They're very wrong. One reason the economic consensus on tariffs is so wrong is because nearly all of the models that economists use to study international trade assume either no trade deficits at all, or they assume that deficits are short-lived and quickly self-correct through currency adjustments. According to standard models, trade deficits will cause the dollar to weaken, which reduces imports and boosts exports, eventually wiping out the trade deficit. If that happens, tariffs may be unnecessary, because trade will balance itself over time, and in this view, intervening with tariffs can only make things worse. However, that view is at odds with reality. The United States has run current account deficits for 5 decades, and these have widened precipitously in recent years, going from about 2% of GDP in the first Trump administration to a high of nearly 4% of GDP in the Biden administration. And this has happened all while the dollar has appreciated, not depreciated, as those models might tell you. The long run is here, and the models are wrong. One reason they are wrong is that they fail to account for the U.S. provision of global reserve assets. Reserve status matters, and because demand for the dollar has been insatiable, it has been too strong for international flows to balance, even over 5 decades. More recent economic analyses allow for the possibility of persistent trade deficits that resist automatically rebalancing, and that's more in line with reality that the U.S. has experienced. They show that by imposing tariffs against exporting countries, the U.S. can improve economic outcomes, raise revenues, and impose huge losses for the tariff nation, even with full retaliation. In this sense, analysis of what economists call the incidence of tariffs indicates that a large share and burden of the tariffs are paid for by the country on which we are applying the tariffs. Countries that run large trade surpluses are pretty inflexible. They can't find other sources of demand to substitute for America's. Instead, they have no choice but to export, and America is the largest consumer market in the world. By contrast, America has plenty of substitution options. We can make stuff at home, or we can buy from countries that treat us well, treat us fairly, instead of from countries that take advantage of us. This difference in leverage means that other countries end up bearing the cost of tariffs. We can reallocate our demand across borders more easily than other countries can move their factories across borders. In 2018-2019, China bore the cost of President Trump's historic tariffs through a weaker currency, meaning their citizens became poorer with less purchasing power on the global stage. The tariff revenue paid for by China was used to finance President Trump's tax cuts for American workers and firms. This time around, tariffs will help pay for both tax cuts and deficit reduction. Lower taxes on Americans, financed in part by revenue provided from foreigners, will create economic growth, dynamism, and opportunity, the likes of which our country has never seen, ushering in President Trump's new golden age. Deficit reduction will help lower treasury rates, and with them mortgage rates and consumer credit card rates, stimulating an economic boom. It is important to note here that tariffs are not levied simply to collect revenues. For example, the president's reciprocal tariffs are designed to address tariff and non-tariff barriers and other forms of cheating like currency manipulation, dumping, and subsidies to gain unfair advantage. Revenue is a nice side effect, and if it is used in part for lowering taxes, it can help turbocharge competitiveness improvements and boost U.S. exports. Burden sharing can allow the United States to continue leading the free world for many decades. It's a must not only for fairness, but for feasibility. If we don't rebuild our manufacturing sector, we will be strained in providing the security we need for our safety, the safety of the world, and to underpin our financial markets and global financial markets. The world can still have the American defense umbrella and trading system and reserve assets, but it should start paying its fair share for them. Thank you, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Look, when I finally publish my 8-volume magnum opus, 40 on tariffs, all these questions will be answered. We will have clarity, right? We will have rhetorical clarity. You will see all these things spelled out with precision. But you're going to have to wait till I publish 40 on tariffs. Bye-bye.